What happens when the greatest prophet in history dies? When Moses, the man who led Israel through the Red Sea, confronted Pharaoh and received God's law on Mount Sinai, took his final breath on Mount Nebo, you might think the nation would come to a standstill, that everything God promised would fade into sorrow. But you'd be wrong. The moment Moses passed, God's plan didn't pause. It advanced with unstoppable force. 7 unexpected, powerful events shook the people of Israel and opened a brand new, epic chapter in their story. These aren't just historical moments, they're life-changing lessons, alive and relevant for you right now. Curious what God did when Moses died? Watch to the end to find out. In this video, we'll dive into 7 breathtaking moments that shaped Israel's future. From supernatural miracles to divine commands that defied all human logic. Each one is a bold reminder. God never stops moving, no matter the loss, no matter the uncertainty. If you're ready to be encouraged and have your eyes open to God's power, hit that like button now and subscribe so you don't miss this epic journey. Let's cross the Jordan, face the walls of Jericho, and see how God turns loss into victory. When Moses, the greatest prophet in Israel's history, took his final breath on Mount Nebo, you'd think the nation would be consumed by grief. That everything would pause to honor the man who stood up to Pharaoh, parted the Red Sea, and brought the law down from Sinai. But the Bible tells a different story. There was no royal funeral, no national day of mourning, not even a recorded moment of public sorrow. The moment Moses closed his eyes, God moved. A new chapter began, swiftly, unexpectedly, and full of drama. Deuteronomy 34, 5-6 says, Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, and God buried him in a valley. But to this day, no one knows the exact place. No witnesses, no grave. And yet, Moses' mission didn't die with him in the desert. It was passed on. And what happened next was truly astonishing. Picture the scene. The Israelites are standing at the edge of the Jordan River after 40 years of wandering. Ahead of them lies the Promised Land, full of fortified cities, powerful armies, and giants. And now, their leader is gone. Who will lead them forward? How can a people who survived by miracles now survive by battle? In that moment of confusion and uncertainty, God acted again, without delay. And in doing so, he made one thing clear. His plan never stops, even when his servants do. The moment Moses died, the atmosphere among the Israelites shifted, but not into silent mourning. The Bible records no pause for a memorial, no national ceremony, no debate over who would take over. Instead, God spoke directly, without delay. Not through the elders, not through Aaron's sons, but to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' longtime assistant. Joshua 1:1-2 says, After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' assistant, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I am giving to the Israelites. This wasn't a gentle invitation. It was a command. Urgent, unmistakable, a call to action. Now stop and think. Have you ever wondered how God prepares a leader? Joshua wasn't a random choice. He wasn't a priest. He wasn't a high-ranking elder. He wasn't the loudest or most visible man in the crowd. But he had been forged in silence, in the background, through years of faithful service. He had climbed Mount Sinai with Moses when the 10 Commandments were given, Exodus 24:13. He had stood guard at the tent of meeting, where Moses spoke with God face to face, Exodus 33:11. He was one of only 2 spies who remained faithful and full of courage when the other 10 spread fear and doubt, Numbers 14:6-9. Joshua didn't earn his calling through charisma. He earned it through consistency. His quiet faithfulness in small things had prepared him for something far greater than he could have imagined. Deuteronomy 34:9 reveals a powerful detail. Joshua, son of Nun, was filled with the spirit of wisdom because Moses had laid his hands on him. Before he died, Moses laid hands on Joshua, not just a symbolic act, but a divine transfer of mission and authority. This wasn't a human election. It wasn't a council's decision. It was God's appointment. Ecclesiastes 3:1 reminds us, there is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens. When one season ends, God is already setting the next in motion. And Joshua stands as living proof that heaven's mission never misses a beat. Think about this in your own life. Have you ever lost someone important, a mentor, a leader, a loved one, and felt like everything was falling apart? The story of Joshua reminds us that God always has a succession plan. He doesn't leave his people stranded. He never forgets his promises. Psalm 75:6-7 declares, "Promotion does not come from the east, west, or south. It is God who judges. He brings one down, he exalts another." In the moment that felt like the greatest loss, God had already prepared someone to carry the mission forward. And it all began with Joshua's willingness to obey. If you think Joshua's role was hard, just imagine the task God gave him. In Joshua 1:3-5, God says, "Every place where you set your foot, I have given you, as I promised Moses. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you." This wasn't a simple mission. Joshua was now responsible for leading over 600,000 men, not to mention women and children, across the Jordan River at flood stage into a land filled with fortified cities, fierce warriors, and giants from the line of Anak. And who was Joshua? Not a seasoned general, not a royal figure, just a former assistant, the one who watched over Moses' tent. Put yourself in Joshua's shoes. You've just been handed the leadership of a restless, battle-untested nation, marching into enemy territory, vastly outnumbered and undertrained. How would you feel? Overwhelmed? Afraid? Maybe even unworthy? That would be completely human. But notice what God does. He doesn't hand Joshua a battle plan. He doesn't offer maps or reinforcements. Instead, he gives him a promise. "As I was with Moses, so I will be with you." That's the key. Exodus 33:14 says, "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest." It wasn't Joshua's experience that would make the difference. It wasn't his talent or strength. It was the presence of God. That's what turned a tent keeper into a nation builder, and fear into bold obedience. God's promise to Joshua wasn't just a comforting word. It carried the weight of a covenant. What God began with Moses, freeing Israel from Egypt and leading them through the wilderness, he would now complete through Joshua. But from a human point of view, the task was impossible. The land of Canaan wasn't empty. Jericho stood tall, its walls seemingly impenetrable. The giants, descendants of Anak, had once terrified an entire generation. Numbers 13:33. The kings of Canaan weren't preparing to surrender. They were ready for war. Yet God didn't say, "I will give it to you." He said, "I have given it to you." He spoke as if victory had already happened. Romans 4:17 says that God is the one who calls into being things that were not as though they were. That's not logic, that's faith. Zechariah 4:6 reminds us, "Not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit, says the Lord Almighty." Joshua wasn't called to maintain life in the wilderness like Moses. He was called to conquer nations. And God wasn't waiting for him to feel ready. He just wanted Joshua to trust and move forward. In Joshua 1:9, God makes it clear, "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. This is the core truth. God doesn't call the qualified, He qualifies the called. As 1 Thessalonians 5:24 assures us, the one who calls you is faithful, and He will do it. Joshua's story isn't just ancient history, it's a message for you today. Have you ever stood at the edge of something that felt impossible? Maybe you're facing a major life change, the loss of a job, a move to the unknown, or the passing of someone who meant everything to you. Maybe you feel unqualified, not strong enough, not experienced enough, not faithful enough. But look at Joshua. He wasn't Moses. He didn't carry a miracle-working staff. He didn't have decades of national leadership. He didn't have a legacy yet. But he had something God always looks for: faithfulness. Faithfulness in the small things. Faithfulness when no one's watching. Faithfulness before the spotlight ever shines. And it was that quiet obedience that shaped him for something far greater than he could imagine. What about you? Maybe the hard seasons you've walked through, the hidden work, the quiet service, the late nights of praying when no one knew. Maybe those have been God's forge, shaping you for a mission you haven't even seen yet. Ephesians 3:20 declares, "Now to Him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to His power that is at work within us." When a mentor leaves, a chapter closes, or something ends, don't assume God's plan ends with it. Like Joshua, you may be standing at your own Jordan River, a crossroads moment where God is inviting you to step forward in faith, not by sight. Think about the times you've hesitated, not because the opportunity wasn't there, but because you didn't feel ready. Maybe you're waiting on God for a sign, but what if He's been waiting on you to say yes first? Joshua didn't have all the answers. He didn't have a detailed roadmap, but he had what mattered most: the presence of God. And that was enough. In 2 Timothy 2:2, Paul writes, "The things you have heard me say, entrust to faithful people who will also be qualified to teach others." Faithfulness is the foundation of calling. Your quiet faithfulness today, in the small, hidden things, may be the very training ground for the greater purpose God has in store tomorrow. God isn't waiting for you to feel qualified. He's looking for a willing heart. Joshua's story shows us that when God hands off a mission, it's never random. When Moses died, the calling didn't fade. It exploded into action. And the same may be true in your life. Maybe you're standing on the edge of a new season, one where God isn't just calling you to move forward, but promising to go with you. So be strong, be courageous, because like Joshua, you never walk alone. Moses, the man who stood against Pharaoh, led Israel through the Red Sea and received the law at Mount Sinai, was gone. Now, in his place, stood Joshua, not a mighty prophet with miracles and thunder, but a quiet, faithful servant who had walked in Moses' shadow. And now, he faced a staggering mission: to lead an entire nation across the Jordan River into a land filled with fortified cities, giants, and battles waiting to happen. You might expect doubt, resistance, or hesitation from the people. After all, Joshua wasn't Moses. But what happened next was astonishing. This new generation of Israelites didn't just accept Joshua. They rallied behind him with fierce unity, even pledging their lives in obedience to his leadership. And at the edge of the Jordan, God moved. The waters parted, just like at the Red Sea. It wasn't just a miracle, it was confirmation. The same God who had walked with Moses was still with them. This is a story of obedience, unity, and the unchanging power of God. A new chapter written in faith and wonder. After God appointed Joshua, Israel stood at a crossroads: accept their new leader, or fall into the chaos of doubt. Moses had not been just a leader. He was the voice of God to the people, the man who stood between them and divine judgment, the one who brought water from rock and manna from heaven. Joshua, in contrast, was just an assistant. No grand miracles, no mighty signs. Would the people follow someone like him? Their answer came swiftly and shockingly. Joshua 1:16-18 records their response. Whatever you command us, we will do. Wherever you send us, we will go. Just as we obeyed Moses in everything, we will obey you. Only may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. Anyone who rebels against your word shall be put to death. Be strong and courageous. This wasn't empty talk. Their loyalty came with a fierce resolve. Rebellion would cost lives. Why so serious? Because they had learned, painfully, from the failures of the past generation. For 40 years in the wilderness, they watched what disobedience brought. They saw the earth swallow Korah and his followers for challenging Moses. Numbers 16. They buried their parents one by one because of doubt and unbelief when faced with the promised land. Numbers 32:11-13. Hebrews 3:19 sums it up. They could not enter because of unbelief. This new generation refused to repeat history. They understood that disobedience delays destiny, and delay can steal the promise. So they chose to trust, not because Joshua was Moses, but because they believed the same God still led them. This unity among the Israelites wasn't blind loyalty to Joshua. It was alignment with God's purpose. They didn't just say, "We will obey you." They encouraged him, "Be strong and courageous." It was a rare moment in Israel's history. A whole generation standing in agreement, not because of the leader's charisma or track record, but because they were hungry to step into the promise. Paul echoes this timeless truth in 1 Corinthians 1:10. I appeal to you that there be no divisions among you, but that you be united in mind and thought. This unity wasn't based on emotion or admiration for Joshua. It was forged in the wilderness, where the consequences of disobedience had been etched into memory. Disobedience led to delay, but unity in obedience led to breakthrough. Pause for a moment. What happens when a community decides to align with God's will, even when there are questions, fears, or unknowns? The Israelites didn't demand Joshua prove himself. They chose to trust him because they trusted the God who appointed him. Hebrews 13:17 reminds us, obey your leaders and submit to them, so that their work will be a joy, not a burden, for that would be of no benefit to you. God's kingdom does not operate like a democracy. Power doesn't come from a vote. It's a theocracy, where unity and submission under divinely appointed leadership prepare the way for the miraculous. As the Israelites stood on the banks of the Jordan, they faced more than just a physical barrier. It was a spiritual threshold. During harvest season, the river overflowed its banks, becoming a wall of impossibility between them and the promised land. Before them was a rushing current. Behind them, the wilderness years. But God didn't let them retreat. Joshua 3:15-17 recounts a breathtaking miracle. As soon as the feet of the priests carrying the ark touched the water's edge, the Jordan's waters stopped flowing. They piled up in a heap far upstream, and the people crossed over opposite Jericho. The priests stood firm on dry ground in the middle of the Jordan. This wasn't symbolic. It was supernatural, a rerun of the Red Sea miracle, declaring that the same God who worked with Moses now walks with Joshua. If you remember the Red Sea parting with walls of water on both sides under Moses, God now does it again, but this time for Joshua. And this miracle wasn't just about crossing, it was about confirmation. Joshua 4:14 says, that day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they stood in awe of him all the days of his life, just as they had stood in awe of Moses. God doesn't campaign for the leaders he appoints. He confirms them by his power. If anyone doubted Joshua before, This moment erased every question. It was God's unspoken declaration, "This is my servant, follow him." Mark 16:20 echoes this divine principle. The disciples went out and preached everywhere, and the Lord worked with them, confirming the word with signs following. When God sends someone, he doesn't abandon them. He moves through them. What's remarkable is that the miracle didn't happen instantly. It only took place when the priests stepped into the water. Joshua 3:13 says, "As soon as the soles of the feet of the priests who bear the ark rest in the waters will be cut off." God didn't part the river beforehand. He waited for an act of faith. This is a simple yet profound test. Will you dare to step forward before the path becomes visible? Hebrews 11:6 reminds us, "Without faith, it is impossible to please God." The miracle wasn't for bystanders, but for those who dared to step into the current, carrying the Ark of the Covenant, the sacred symbol of God's presence and promises. 2 Corinthians 10:18 emphasizes a key truth. It is not the one who commends himself who is approved, but the one whom the Lord commends. The miracle at the Jordan didn't just help the people cross, it confirmed Joshua's spiritual legitimacy. Moses had the Red Sea, Joshua had the Jordan. Both were affirmed by the supernatural power of God. Through this act, God was declaring loud and clear, "I have not changed. My power didn't die with Moses." As the people stood on dry ground in the midst of a raging river, they recognized that the God of Moses was still with them, and with Joshua, his chosen leader. This miracle wasn't just about reaching the promised land, it was about building faith in a new generation, solidifying their trust in their new leader, and preparing them for the battles ahead. It reminds us that before victory often comes a step of faith, a simple but powerful act, stepping into the water. The story of unity and the miracle at the Jordan River is not just history. It is a message for us today. Have you ever stood before a barrier that felt impossible to cross? A major challenge in your work, family, or faith? Maybe you're standing on the edge of your own Jordan, where everything seems impossible and you're unsure whether you have the strength to move forward. The people of Israel teach us that unity and faith are the keys that unlock miracles. Their unity with Joshua reminds us that God's kingdom operates through order and obedience. When the people stood together, refusing to let doubt or division take root, they prepared themselves for God's miracle. Ask yourself, are you united with the leaders God has placed in your life? Or are doubt, criticism, or division keeping you from stepping into his promise? 1 Peter 3:8 urges, "Finally, all of you, be like-minded, be sympathetic, love one another, be compassionate and humble." Unity doesn't mean agreeing on everything. It means aligning yourself with God's purpose, even when you don't fully understand his plan. The miracle at the Jordan River is a powerful reminder that God often asks us to walk by faith before we see the results. The priests didn't wait for the river to part. They stepped into the water, carrying the presence of God. In your life, God may be waiting for you to take that first step, a hard decision, a bold commitment, or an act of obedience, before he opens the way. James 2:17 affirms, "Faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead." Are you willing to step into your waters, even when the path ahead is unclear? This story also teaches us that God confirms those he chooses with his power, not by titles or human recognition. Joshua didn't carry Moses' reputation, but God gave him a miracle that caused the whole nation to stand in awe. If you feel unqualified, remember, God doesn't need you to be perfect. He just needs you to be willing. Romans 8:31 asks, "If God is for us, who can be against us?" When you walk by faith and align with God's purpose, he will confirm your path with signs that only he can perform. The Israelites had crossed the Jordan River and set foot on the land of Canaan. where the towering walls of Jericho rose before them like a bold challenge. After witnessing the miracle of parted waters and uniting under Joshua's leadership, they likely thought it was time to draw up strategies, train soldiers, and prepare to attack. But God had a different plan, a plan not based on strength or human logic. At a moment when action seemed imminent, God didn't send a battle map. Instead, He offered a sacred encounter from heaven, changed the way He provided for them, and gave a command that caused the entire nation to pause. Not to fight, but to consecrate themselves. Before they could tear down any external walls, God wanted them to tear down what was impure, indifferent, or rebellious within. Spiritual victory doesn't begin with swords. It begins with surrender. It doesn't come from numbers or skill, but from holiness and unwavering obedience. And that is the lesson God wanted them, and us, to remember before facing any battle in life. As Joshua stood near Jericho, the first fortified city standing between Israel and the Promised Land, he may have believed that the next step was battle strategy, troop formation, and decisive leadership. But what unfolded next turned everything upside down. The Lord didn't send a battle plan. He sent a divine encounter. Joshua 5:13-15 records. When Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua went up to him and asked, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" "Neither," he replied, "but as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come." Then Joshua fell face down to the ground in reverence. This was no ordinary angel, no mere warrior. This was the commander of heaven's armies. Many scholars believe it was a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ himself. Exodus 15:3 says, "The Lord is a warrior. The Lord is his name." That moment shattered Joshua's assumptions, and perhaps ours as well. As the newly commissioned leader of Israel, Joshua may have assumed he was in control, the one charting the course ahead. But this encounter makes it clear: God does not come to take sides, he comes to take over. When Joshua asked, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" the answer was striking: neither. Why? Because the real question is not, is God on our side, but are we on God's side? Joshua immediately understood and fell in worship. But instead of ordering an attack, the commander told Joshua something unexpected. "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." Before the walls of Jericho could fall, Joshua had to fall first, into reverence, into surrender, into holiness. This moment reminds us that every true battle begins not on the front lines, but in the secret place, where we bow low and recognize who is truly in command. Victory doesn't come by might, but by alignment with the presence and holiness of God. Ephesians 6:12 reminds us, "We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness in the heavenly realms." Joshua's battle was never just about conquering Jericho. It was about aligning with the strategy of heaven. Before any sword was drawn or trumpet sounded, Joshua had to surrender. Without surrender, there is no victory. Without holiness, there is no authority. This was not Joshua's battle, it was the Lord's. 2 Chronicles 20:15 echoes this truth. "Do not be afraid or discouraged, for the battle is not yours, but God's." Joshua was learning what every spiritual warrior must know. God doesn't come to endorse our plans. He calls us to align with His. James 4:7 declares, "Submit yourselves therefore to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you." You cannot resist darkness unless you are rightly positioned under the light. True victory comes not from strength, but from spiritual alignment, through holiness, worship, and obedience. After crossing the Jordan and raising memorial stones, the Israelites encountered another unexpected shift. Joshua 5:12 records, The manna stopped the day after they ate the produce of the land. There was no longer any manna for the Israelites, but that year they ate the fruit of Canaan. For 40 years in the wilderness, manna had been their daily reminder of God's supernatural care. Every morning, it fell like dew. No sowing, no reaping, just faith to gather. But now, suddenly, it was gone. No announcement, no angelic trumpet, just silence. This moment must have been confusing. To the people, manna wasn't just food, it was proof that God was near. And now, with its disappearance, surely someone asked, has God stopped providing? Have we done something wrong? But the truth is this: God wasn't withdrawing, he was transitioning. Hebrews 11:1 reminds us, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. In the wilderness, faith meant trusting God to rain down provision. But in Canaan, faith meant partnering with him, planting, harvesting, building, and reigning. Manna was for survival, but Canaan is for stewardship. God was calling his people out of a survival mindset into a season of maturity. Not because he was no longer providing, but because he was now inviting them to grow into co-laborers in his promise. Philippians 4:19 declares, "And my God will supply all your needs according to his riches in glory in Christ Jesus." The stopping of manna wasn't a sign of abandonment, it was a promotion. The Israelites now had to plant, harvest, and trust God in a new way. He was shifting them from miraculous survival to faithful stewardship. It was no longer about waking up to a miracle. It was about walking daily in obedience. This speaks to us today. When God stops providing in the way you're used to, it may not mean he's gone silent. It may mean he's inviting you into maturity. Have you ever felt like God was quiet in a certain area of your life? It may not be silence. It may be training. He's calling you to grow, to build, to believe in a deeper way. As soon as the Israelites set foot in Canaan, with the walls of Jericho looming in the distance, God gave a command that brought all military plans to a halt. Joshua 5:2-3 says, "At that time the Lord said to Joshua, 'Make flint knives and circumcise the Israelites again.' So Joshua made flint knives and circumcised them." A strange command, risky, and seemingly terrible timing. Every fighting man would be weakened for days. No backup army, no fortress. And Jericho was watching. Yet God said, "Circumcise them." Why? Because before God leads you into great battles, he calls you into covenant. Victory doesn't start with swords. It starts with surrender. God wasn't preparing warriors first. He was preparing hearts. The circumcision was a recommitment to holiness, a sign that they belonged to him. God honors consecration more than calculation. In his kingdom, purity precedes power. Joshua 5:4-7 explains that during the 40 years in the wilderness, all the men born in that time had never been circumcised. They had not received the physical sign of the covenant God made with Abraham. Before entering battle in the Promised Land, they didn't need sharpened swords. They needed to reaffirm their identity. We belong to the Lord. Circumcision wasn't just a physical act. It was spiritual consecration. It was a declaration. We will not win by strength, strategy, or numbers. We will win because we are a covenant people. And when they obeyed, Joshua 5:9 records God's words. "Today I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you." That circumcision didn't just cut the flesh, it cut off the mindset of slavery, the shame of bondage, the identity of the past. It was a cleansing act, marking their transition from being former slaves to becoming God's holy people. Zechariah 4:6 reminds us, "Not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit, says the Lord." God was not looking for the strongest fighters, but for surrendered hearts. He wanted Israel to step into battle not confident in weapons, but confident in his name. Psalm 27 declares, Some trust in chariots, some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord. There must always be inward consecration before outward conquest. God often asks us to lay down our strength, our plans, control, or self-reliance as a reminder that victory is His, not ours. He empowers those who surrender. The story of the commander of the Lord's army, the stopping of manna, and the call to circumcision carries powerful lessons for us today. Are you facing your own Jericho? A wall that feels impossible to break through? Maybe it's a broken relationship, an unfulfilled dream, or a major decision weighing on your heart. These moments remind us that spiritual victory never starts with strength. It begins with surrender. Joshua's encounter with the heavenly commander was a turning point. He may have thought he was the one leading, but in that sacred moment, he realized God was in command. Joshua removed his sandals and fell face down, a symbol of laying down control, letting go of his own plans, and entering a space of worship and obedience. Is there something you need to remove today? Pride, self-reliance, or the fear of letting go? Romans 8:31 declares, "If God is for us, who can be against us?" Victory doesn't come from you. It comes through you when you're in alignment with Him. When you surrender, God fights for you. And when the manna ceased, another truth was revealed. God's silence was not abandonment. It was an invitation to maturity. Perhaps you're clinging to the manna of a past season, a familiar way of life, a past provision, a safe routine. But now, God is opening new fields, where He's calling you to plant, trust, and co-labor with Him. Will you stay where it's safe, or will you step into the new with faith? The command to circumcise was a powerful reminder. God often requires consecration before He brings victory. Before Israel faced their greatest battle, they were not called to sharpen swords, but to surrender. God didn't want them to fight in strength. He wanted them to fight in separation. And what about you? Is there something God is asking you to cut away? Maybe it's a habit that quietly dishonors Him, a fear from the past that's keeping you from stepping into the future, a hardened attitude, pride, resentment, or doubt. Consecration is never painless. It exposes, it breaks. But that's exactly where God prepares us to carry what He's promised. 1 Peter 1:16 declares, "Be holy, for I am holy." God isn't asking for perfection, but He's seeking a surrendered heart. Victory doesn't come from the strength of your hands, but from knowing whose hands you belong to. Are you willing to let God cut away the old so you can enter the new with clean hands and a pure heart? Victory doesn't start on the battlefield. It starts in the quiet, inner work of surrender. Moses may be gone, but God's plan never stopped. From the transfer of leadership to Joshua, the miracle at the Jordan River, the appearance of the heavenly commander, and the call to consecration before battle, these moments reveal one truth. God is always advancing, even in seasons that feel like an ending. What about you? Where are you standing today? Are you facing your own Jordan River? A challenge that seems too big, a transition you didn't expect, or a calling that feels beyond your ability? Then hear this. God is not finished with you. He is preparing you for a new season, a deeper level of trust, and the fulfillment of His promises, if you're willing to step forward in faith. Are you ready to release control, surrender, and trust Him the way Israel did? Romans 8:31 says, "If God is for us, who can be against us?" Whether you're still in the wilderness or standing in front of your Jericho, God is inviting you to step up, obey, and let Him lead. If this message has stirred something in you, like the video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to hear more powerful stories from Scripture. And in the comments below, tell us, what part of Joshua's journey spoke to you the most? See you in the next video. May the Lord bless and lead you on your journey of faith.